from their encounters with races from other planets. The information is the activation. Let's awaken this world together. We are the forever students, and we will not be silent. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. Pretty wild. Ooh, welcome everybody to Full Spectrum Universe. My name is Rob Yox. We are the Embattled Broadcast, here to dive into the past, to enjoy the present and be in the present, to dictate the terms of our future. Welcome, everybody. I told you we're going live every night, except for Sunday, of course, because some people, it's a holiday. Every night for the next 2 weeks to make sure that we beat this algorithmic bug. Nothing will hold us down. Nothing will stop us. We are the forever students. We will not be quietly sent into the night. We will take this as far as we can. We're going to go all the way in. Tonight is the exploration of creation. Now, this is my coffee cup. It's making a very weird thing right here, but that's okay. We're going to move it off camera real quick. There we go. As my hand completely gets blacked out, but I see we got Sugar be here, Nancy's here, Edward's here, Discog is here, Jason's here. Welcome, everybody. Tonight is a special night because I love creation mythology. I also love diving into ancient civilizations and what they believe to be the beginning of their specific culture, right? Now, when we go over a lot of this creation mythology, we see patterns looming, right? There are specific places. Let me fix the mic here. I just ran in, came home from work. I see Michael's here as well. There are specific trends that we see throughout all of these creation myths. A lot of them sound like the same specific type of creation with a different twist as per the culture. So we're going to go over a few, right? And we're going to touch on a few as well. We're also going to talk about the hero's journey because the creation myth with the hero's journey has a lot of congruency. There is so much to talk about when we talk about all of these different characters that are not quite there at creation. There's also another aspect that we see that happens directly after creation, which is the brothers or the brother and sister or the twins, which is the offspring of these creator gods, such as in the ancient Iroquois legends of creation. Ainsworth is here, Gray Noise is here, Valentina is here, Lynn is here. Welcome, everybody. We see that the Great Spirit, right? And I did an entire presentation. It's actually on this channel. If you go down, you can find it. It's the Iroquois and some of the native cultures, especially in the northeastern region of the United States. We see that there was this place of no suffering, of no want, of no need. There was this place that everybody was just kind of hanging out, right? And it was the Great Spirit and the Sky Woman. And the Great Spirit decides that he's going to create something more, and he's going to task the Sky Woman with creating the beings that reside on this new something. So what they do is they go to the great tree. Now this tree can be seen as the tree of life, the tree of knowledge. There are many derivatives of this tree and a lot of symbolism around this tree. So what happens is the Great Spirit rips this tree out of the ground and creates a hole. And what he does is he sends the Sky Woman or Sky Mother down that hole, and she comes to a place of just complete water. Not knowing what else to do, she looks for things that reside there as the animals to help her and guide her to a place where she can rest, so that she can get her bearings and then create what's next, right? And when we get past this point of where she creates the continents themselves, things tend to go in a bit of a different direction, right? There are similarities, but there are also discrepancies past that point. So what happens, right? The Sky Mother, what she does is she goes and she creates, she creates some of the animals around, and she asks them for help because she has to create this land where she can rest her head. So first she goes to there's a couple different animals. She goes to a bird. She asks the bird to go grab her soil from the sea floor. The bird attempts to and dies. Then she asks like a squirrel, and essentially 3 or 4 animals die before we get to the muskrat. And what the muskrat does is it dives as far down as it can, and it grabs a handful of earth and comes back to the surface, handful of sand at the bottom of the ocean, comes back to the top, and it says to the sky mother, "What shall I do with this now?" And they come in contact with the great turtle, and the great turtle is a gigantic turtle. So the sky mother essentially takes that land or that earth and spreads it across the great turtle's back, and the great turtle soon then becomes an entire landmass, which in turn is the representation of the United States of the North American continent for these native tribes, which is where they lived. And once that happens, the Sky Mother rests, and then she goes and she decides that she's going to create. And in some instances of the native culture, she goes into caves, and as she goes into the cave, she creates the insects. When she goes back into the caves again, she creates the animals, or the small creatures that reside there. And in the last round, she creates humans. And as she creates humans, she deems 2 of those humans to be her children, and those 2 children are 2 men. And eventually, she has a third child who will become the moon, right? The moon and the stars. That's where we get the 7 sisters from. So these 2 brothers, one is tasked with basically, residing over the land, and making things of a positive nature. And one of the brothers decides that he's going to make things of a negative nature, such as poisonous snakes, things like that. They go to battle, and the good brother is down there on the land, and is also tasked with exiling demons and negative entities. In the Native American culture, they have some entities that are not of, you know, great standing. So, and I know this is a lot for very the opening statements here, but this story is captivating. And when we go over it, we see a lot of these similarities to different tribes, right? Like the Aboriginals have the same sort of creation myth, which would lead me to believe that there's a common ancestor between the Native Americans and the Aboriginals, or that the Native Americans stemmed from the Aborigines culture, right? Then we also go to the Nigerian Bushmen, right, or the African Bushmen, and they have a similar story, where when this is one of the reasons why we look at Stephen and Evan Strong's works of, telling these myths and their findings, their archaeological findings from Australia, because in my view, life started in Australia. There's a lot of people who think that life began in Africa, but I believe the Aboriginal people were the ones who populated the world, right? And that would also be indicative of this cross pollination of mythos from the creation myth. So this is sort of like with the with the Native Americans, the African Bushmen, even the Holy Bible talks about somewhat of the same style of creation, right? It just deems a man as opposed to a woman, God and the great spirit of the Sky Woman. Now, what happens to the Sky Woman eventually is she becomes the sun. After all of this creation, she becomes weak. She's given everything, right? And when she does that, she then becomes the sun itself, because she wants to shine all the time. And what happens is the animals that were residing on Earth at that time, or on the Native American back of the turtle, they were afraid when Mother went away, because Mother went away and didn't become the sun right away. So there was a great night that stood there for a long time, and they thought that they would never see the great, the great mother, or the Sky Woman, ever again. But now when she becomes the sun, she shows them that even though it becomes dark at night, she will rise with them every day in the morning. And this is sort of where the disconnect to the culture of today comes in, because a lot of it was patriarchal. Like the patriarchy shows a lot of different religions that stem from a male figure, while ancient natives really held a reverence for the male and the female. There was a co-opting of these stories all over the world and these ancient cultures. It was only the later religions that were created that went towards just the masculine side of things. And this is why when we're looking at our spirituality today, we're trying to bring that alignment of the divine feminine with that sacred masculine, because that's how the ancients did it. And they lived a much more purer life, right? And that's exactly right. Valentina is right here when she says the Navajo are a matriarchal society. That is very true. That is very true. And this is one of the reasons why we really have to understand that societies were very, very different. And when we look even further back than some of the Native American creation stories, we have to ask the question, did these come from off planet? Or did these come from the inception of this planet itself? Right? We've talked a lot about contact and all the different islands like Mu, Atlantis, Lemuria that supposed to predate these ancient cultures that we're talking about today. So what came first, right? This is like the chicken or the egg. I believe that these stories came from before the times of Atlantis, before the times of the island of Mu and Lemuria. I believe that, man started in a pocket, and that pocket was between Lower Shambhala, right, and the Atlanteans. And while the great cataclysm was happening from, off-world entities kind of coming here and maneuvering and manipulating a little bit, these two groups became one when they went underground during those cataclysms, like the Ice Age and the Great Flood, to make it, to survive. And then they intermingled. And this is why our DNA is so vast over time, because we come from two sections of different styles of humankind that resided on this planet, right? So I know that that was a lot. I went into that, but I had to recant that story because it means a lot to me, and I think that it should mean a lot to everybody. There is a lot of connection between the great spirits, the earth itself, the animals, and humanity. And that's a bridge is a great place to start, right? So these creation myths that we're talking about, we're going to talk a little bit about a few of them very, very shortly. But before we do, let us pull up our slideshow and start where we left off the last time. And we're going to get to the creation itself, right? We're actually going to go to that slide first. And this is the similarities of these creation stories. So it's reasonable to imagine that every society needs a set of creation myths. People have the opportunity to explain where they came from and how they got to where they are. Creation myths are often an order of society and put gods, people, and animals in the places where they belong. Gods above kings, kings above the humans, and humans above the animals. The creation myth gives the ruling class the ability to name someone in power and then trace that lineage back to its ancestry. Creation myths also glorify these gods. The gods breathe life into the world and the human beings. The gift of life to humanity requires that men pay the gods through rituals. Some myths of different cultures betray beliefs and are basically this is the main reason that humans were created, and we were also able to pray to these gods, make sacrifices to them. And these creation myths often give us specific gods and areas that they rule. Different deities were thought to protect and control specific realms of human activity or defined areas of the world. Thus, for example, to alleviate a drought, prayers and offerings would be addressed to the rain god. The messages conveyed by the myths served myth making societies and groups to justify their domination of others or to impose rules that would command respect because they were supported by divine authority. So, creation myths, while some are very, very similar, right, or there is a similarity between them, Some sound wildly different or sound like they vary, when in actuality they don't. If we break it down to its root level, a lot of them are the same. And many of them begin with a vision of chaos or complete disorder, right? The aim of the creation myth is to bring the chaos under control to promote civilization. Now, before we go any further, when we hear this sounds like a controlling mechanism. I see Ronnie's here. Selena made it. Awesome, guys. Awesome. Andromeda's here. Bridget's here. Rainwater's here. Sorry, I missed a few people coming in. Kelly is here. Wonderful you're all here. Thank you all so much. Remember, like, share, subscribe. The mythos that we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be relevant for every culture across the board, right? But when we say some of these things like these deities and these rituals were meant to purposefully respect these gods or in commemoration of these gods, right? It leads me back to a controlling mechanism, right? They use these mechanisms to formulate what society is supposed to mean or what society is supposed to be. And then they hold these evident truths to sort of keep humanity in check. And this is some of the paradigms that we're breaking down now. And what we're doing is we're looking past these rituals and sort of these rites of passage and what these gods represented to find these similarities in these stories, but to also show us that this was a bevel of context stories of entities trying to be the ruling class of this planet, which in turn, if we look at today, they still act in the same manner. There are still entities of the darkness that are trying to make mankind capitulate to these rites of passage or these rituals in their name. But because we're shifting this paradigm, right, these entities no longer have power, and we can look at the simplistic facts of these stories and show our reverence where reverence is due and not where it is obligated because the people tell us that, right? Or these entities tell us that. So, one thing I wanted to jump into but while we're doing this. So, the creation myths from around the world often start with water or darkness enveloping the entirety of the known universe. Out of that emptiness comes earth, air, water, and the heavens. Often an image of the underworld is also developed. Humans and animals are created and placed on earth. So when we look at some of the newer style societies like the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Greek myths offer examples of creation. And this theology or theonology describes the primal deities associated with the perceived parts of the physical world that emerge from the original emptiness thanks to the fertility of the earth. Now, that can be seen as a symbol of a woman, right? The mother, the great mother, earth, the great mother earth. We see this all the time. So, the creation myth includes a succession myth, and eventually the heavens, the earth, and the sea are ruled by the gods and goddesses that have become the Olympians, right? Zeus as the supreme god, and after Zeus, his allies overthrow the Titans, and he faces a great monster, Typhon, right? Typhon in a battle that shakes the earth and causes great turmoil in the universe. In one version, Prometheus is given the task of giving traits to each of these creatures and finally gives fire to man. And the fire represents both the actual fire that can be used for warmth, cooking, metalwork, and the knowledge that is associated with light. So Zeus was angered by this knowledge and presented to that it was presented to man and punishes Prometheus for bestowing fire to the humans. Now, this is a direct correlation to Adam and Eve, right? Eve eats the apple and is cast out of paradise to roam the earth, right? So Prometheus could also be symbolized as sort of Adam. and Adam is, since it's more of a patriarchal society, Eve wouldn't be the one to make the mistake, it would be Adam. But we see this happening all over the place. When we get into the indigenous cultures, we see the twins. The twins are often referenced, and those twins are never on the same side. They're always opposite. And if we look at the Bible again, we see Cain and Abel as representatives of Adam and Eve in their lineage, and they are at arms with each other, right? I see Princess here, Susan, you know, and Omar's here. Really, really great to see you all. I wouldn't say that Zeus is God. I would say Cronus possibly is seen as God. He is the head of the Titans. And Zeus, being his son, would be more like, I mean, I don't want to reference him to Jesus because that's not the same character at all. But I think Zeus is a representation of some of the angels or archangels that came from God, right? And Zeus is not a demigod. Zeus isn't in a god. A demigod means they're half human, half god. So they are a god. Zeus is classified a god. Now, a little g god, yes, not a big G god. And these Cronus would be the symbolism of God if we looked at it in that way. Because Cronus was revered before Zeus, right? And Zeus would later defeat Cronus and subjugate him to Tartarus, which is the underworld, a giant prison with the rest of the Titans. So to know our mythology is to know the correlation here. But let us keep going. So the Babylonian creation epic, which is Enuma Elish, contemplates the harsh reality of the lives of the early Mesopotamians. The area of Mesopotamia was inhospitable and plagued with natural disasters, most notably the unpredictable floods or the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates River. So the Babylonian myths relates to the creation of the world and man and the gods and their personalities and their traits and their relationship between the two. As in the Greek mythology, there is a battle between the gods for power, and the battle causes universal events and changes and affects the lives of the ancient Mesopotamians. So eventually, Marduk overthrows Tiamat and her consort by thereby ridding the earth of chaos, and order rules the universe. Now, when we talk about Marduk and Tiamat, we know from looking at ancient Sumerian that these entities are from different areas. They're not from this planet. They are seen as star people or Anunnaki from these ancient myths. So these gods actually come off planet, which means that some of these battles that they talk about could have happened off planet or above the planet to then there become the rulers of humanity, right? So we're seeing a lot of this. This becomes a little bit more this becomes a little bit more prevalent in the later mythos, right? Not so much the ancient cultures, right? The ancient cultures as in the Atlanteans, as in the Lumerians. This is like post the 12,500 year half of a yuga cycle, right? And essentially, this is like humanity now that we're talking about, not humanity before this. And it's hard to describe. There is a moment in time where humanity, before that 12,500 year mark, is not the humanity we know of today. They are a bit different genealogically and DNA wise. They are a bit different. They are closer to the hybrid programs that we see happening all over the world right now, right? So there is a difference. And this is why when the Atlanteans and the lower Shambalians come together, they create the next age of mankind. And these are the ones that we're talking about. This is the mythos of their creation. So if there's these battles, it could ensue that these two factions of entities that were residing on the planet wanted to bring these people together because of these cataclysms. They all had to literally be around each other to survive or go off planet. And then what happens? They essentially come down to Earth, or they rise from inside of the Earth to the surface and battle it out for who's going to be the ones that take control, right? So mankind has already been irreparably changed by this time. Mankind spent thousands of years underground. That's part of what we don't talk about a lot of, but they do. And there's still entities that reside underground right now. So as we keep going, we have other groups in the Near East had creation myths also. The Hebrew creation myth is outlined in the Bible. Genesis begins with a void. Earth is not formed and there is only darkness. Unlike the previous two myths, the universe in the Old Testament is created by a single entity, God. God speaks and his desire is done. The first development is light, which is differentiated from the darkness, and the creation continues for 5 days until the earth is ready for man. Then on the sixth day, God creates animals and man and places them into the Garden of Eden. Once in the garden, Eve is created to be the companion of Adam, and eventually Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and then are banished from the garden. As in the Greek myth, the light of knowledge begins the cycle of history for man, right? So this also happens in ancient Sumeria. Man is given something from Enki, and Enki is then feuding with Enlil. And what happens is from this feud, they're deciding who is going to be the head of mankind, who's going to rule mankind. But mankind went from the slave beings to a formidable foe to these Anunnaki once they were given the knowledge, or we could see that as the sexual prowess or desires for sexual reproduction as something that could be the knowledge of, right? So now we're going to take it back to the West a little bit. And in the Americas, the Quiche had a strong creation myth. The Quiche believed that in the beginning there was nothing. There was no sound, no movement, no man nor beast. The land had been created and there was only a still sea. The only beings at this time were the creation gods. And the gods decided that man needed to be created. Therefore, the water had receded and land had formed. After the land was created, the animals were placed on the land. The gods tried to get the animals to praise the gods, but the animals could not speak. It was decided that the animals should live outside and be sacrificed and eaten. The gods then attempted to make man the first, they basically made mankind at that point. And the first try was using mud, but man was too soft and melted away. So the gods used wood, and this man had no soul. So were most of these wood men that were created were destroyed, and the remainder became the monkeys that live in the jungle of Central America. So we see a much different creation myth when we get to the Western cultures of the ancient indigenous people, and even their stories change. But there's a similarity, and we can see the same points of interest in all of these stories. So, what does that mean? That means that there is some common ancestor here, that these specific entities are probably all seen differently from where they are at each individual culture, but they're the same entities. This is the same story being played over and over and over. The only difference is the cultural perspective, or the geological perspective, the geolocation, right? What's happening? Is this a civilization near water? Is this a civilization in the mountains? Is this a civilization near land masses? This is the only differences, but they're all seeing it from their perspective. So it sounds a bit different, but this is the exploration of creation. If we take all these stories and mash them all together, they are the same. There is common denominators between all of them. And this is why I'm so adamant about these stories, is because my one of the things I want to prove in this lifetime, this is a personal goal, is that these entities were the same, which we know a lot about. If we do a lot of the lineage of these entities, we can follow their archetype all the way up to today and the stories of today. But these cultures came from some culture, whether it was off planet or on planet. There was a specific culture with a specific name, with a specific linguistic style that later became the languages, that later became the mythos being translated to these geographic areas where it would be changed, right? This is one of my purposes in this lifetime, is to prove this beyond the shadow of a doubt. So let us keep going a little bit because I have one more story to tell, I believe. Actually, I have a few more stories to tell, but the Yoruba peoples of Nigeria tell a creation myth that begins with the Oralan or Olaran, right? The sky god. And Olaran dropped a chain from the sky to earth, and his sons, Aduduwa, climbed down that specific chain. This is what I told you about with the sky woman and the ancient natives. Now, the gender has changed on the person who comes down, but the method seems the same. The great spirit ripped the tree out of the ground and created a hole for the sky woman to come down. This Yoruba, right, or the Yoruban culture, believes that Olaran, the sky god, right, dropped a chain from the sky to the earth, and his son, Aduduwa, climbed down that specific chain, same function. And with him, he took a handful of dirt and a five-toed chicken and a palm nut, and Adawudu threw the dirt on the waters that covered everything below and the sky, and put the chicken on the dirt, and the chicken moved the dirt until the first dry ground developed. And on the first ground, Adawudu created the Ike kingdom and became the first king. He planted the palm nut, which grew into a large tree representing his offspring, or the family tree, right? The Adawuru is considered the father of all the Yoruba, right? He crowned the male offspring and then sent them to establish their own kingdoms. They alone were the divine rulers. That's a wild story. But tell me you don't see the similarities in that story from all the other ones, right? From all the other ones. It's the same. It's the same stuff. So the next story is the Potawatomi nations of the Great Lakes, the Potawatomi. This is the Great Lake region of North America. And they tell the story of the Anishinaabe. The great creator told Anishinaabe to go and name everything. During his wanderings, he realized that he was the only species that did not have a mate, and he was lonely. And his travels took him to the Great Lakes, where he heard a song coming from across the lake. A woman was singing about making a home for him. He fell in love with this song and the woman as well, right? And he learned how to cross the river and married the woman. This is the fire keeper's daughter. They had four sons who helped them populate the earth. So each of these four sons went one of the four directions of the earth: north, south, east, and west. They each married the daughter of the spirit of the direction in which they went. One son went north, and he had a hard life, but realized that the snow cleansed the earth. Because of the snow, right? The north is represented as the color white. The second son went east. He discovered the rising sun and that the fire was at the center of all life and knowledge. The fire and the sun led to yellow becoming the color of the east, right? The sun went number three went south, and he found the seeds that life comes from with the colors red representing the life's blood. And lastly, the fourth son went to the west, and he found the mountainous regions of the west. He found the setting sun, which represented the circle of life. The west's color is black to represent the dark time. Now, it's pretty crazy, right? That's a wild one. So we can't talk about creation myths without talking about creation myths from the Far East, right? So we have this last one, which is the Panku mythology. And this can be found in China. In this creation myth, Panku grew in a cosmic egg, which contained all the elements of the universe. And as the Panku grew, he separated Earth and the sky from each other. And as he grew even larger, he divided the opportunities or opposites of nature, such as male, female, light, dark, yin and yang. And Panku also created the first human while still inside the egg. And after 18,000 years of developing inside the egg, Panku hatched and the universe was created. Panku, however, died immediately because of the difficulties of making this universe. And Panku's eyes became the moon and the sun, and his sweat the rain. His voice is found in the thunder, and his body is formed the geological features of the earth. So we see this representation of these entities, and these entities are represented in the way that they become the land or they become part of the landscape that we are seeing in these great mythological cultures, right? Now, all of these to me are fascinating. And one of the things I think we should do is we should take these cultures and do deep dives into all of their mythology and see how similar all of the mythology, not just the creation myth, is to the representation of the world at large, right? And uh, it's it's so amazing to see these stories being played out and the way that they pass on through oral traditions up till today. And we see the representations in a lot of the stories that you see as folklore, right? They all represent some of these stories, but just over time they get tweaked a little bit because of the cultures. So, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I'm reading the chat right now, and Sugar Bee, I am so absolutely sorry for your dog. That my prayers go out to you and your whole family, and it pains me to hear that you had to go through that. But we're the Rainbow Warriors, right? And our animals go to the Rainbow Bridge, and that's where they are, and they watch over us, right? They watch over us, and I know that your amazing pooch is looking over you right now. But and we love you, Sugar Bee. We're always here for you if you ever need to say anything or talk or want to come up and speak to any of us, you know that. But these myths are incredible, right? And one of the things I also want to do, which I did a little bit when I did the Galactic Beginning series, we broke down the common narratives in these stories. Now, when we dive into each one of these cultures and sort of bring forward their mythos to really examine it, we're gonna create an archive of these creation stories. And I think that finding a way for this to be available for everybody is going to be really, really great to see how these different cultures around the world started and they believed that they started. And using some of this mythology to move in and out of our own spirituality and see how these entities interacted with mankind and the earth and the sky and the stars, just like we can now. If we put our minds to it and we stay in our 0 point and we get in that moment of stillness, we can use that. And we can also access the Akashic record to get some of the creation myths that we're not privy to in books, right? We can ask the Akashic record to talk about the creation story of us. It's a symbolization of us as well. But some of the entities that reside on, the Pleiades or on Sirius or on Lyra, we can get those stories as well. They are given to us. There are multiple. areas where we can dive into this. So, there's a lot more to this. And there's one more aspect that I want to talk about that comes after the creation story. And that's the twins or the two brothers or two sisters in some aspects. That's the offspring of the creators. And we see this, it's very prevalent in all of these different cultures that we've mentioned. So, you know, when we go to the slideshow here, this is the twins or the brothers. Now, you're saying to yourself, why is this important? This is important because when we get into a lot of these stories, there's something special about this. And so the twins and the brothers hold a special place in mythology. Many cultures have at least one story describing the relationship between two brothers or brothers themselves. Some of these stories are immortals and some are mortals, right? Immortal and mortals. In some cultures, they are twins, while in other relationships, they're just brothers, right? From different ages, different times. Every culture has this story. And this can be that chain that links all of these cultures together, right? So often the twins, these twins or brothers are regarded with respect and honored, while in a few stories the twins are regarded with fear and sometimes said to have been separated or killed at birth. So the twins or the brothers, this myth usually follows one of the storylines. And the first, the plot involves the two brothers are at odds with each other and they fight over everything and never agree. They're usually jealous of each other. And some myths, one kills the other in a fit of rage, right? These stories represent the struggle of power in society and the need for a single leader. The struggling brother may also represent a change in society. So when a culture moves from one type of government or economic system to another, or a brother story often develops, with the brother representing the new society killing the other brother, which is the old society. The second type of brother myths involves in a complementary relationship between these two brothers. The brothers work together, often as one. And when the two are together, they form a complete and strong bond. A number of ancient myths assign to one brother the function of the lower class and to the other brother the traits of the superior or ruling class. These brothers represent the need in society for different skills. So, we all know about the Hebrew Bible, where Cain and Abel are the example. We talked about this just a minute ago. The classic brother story of Cain and Abel were born to Adam and Eve. Cain became a farmer and Abel was a sheep herder. Cain and Abel, you know, took their goods to the altar and sacrificed them to the God. God ignored Cain's offering but accepted the sheep. Cain was distressed about this, but God just told Cain to watch out for sin. And Cain's jealousy became too great to control. So he took Abel out into the fields and killed him. God came to Cain and asked about Abel, but Cain lied and said that he did not know where he was. And Cain was punished by becoming a nomad. And but he was also protected at the same time. And Cain settled in a land of Nod in the story. So there is a similar story found in the Roman myths or the myth of foundation. Romulus and Remus are twins who were suckled by the she wolf and founded the city of Rome. The twins were the sons of the Rhea Silvia and the god Mars. And the twins were put in a basket and sent down to the river where they ran ashore and were rescued by a she wolf. They grew up and joined Robin Hood type of band of youths, right? And they would steal from the robbers and give the money to the poor. And in the city of Albia, where it was overcrowded, the twins decided that they would find their own city and they began to fight over who found the city and who would name it. They fought about who was the most important and strongest. So Romulus killed Remus. right? And this goes back to Egypt as well. Osiris and Seth. Osiris from the Egyptian mythology, another example of sibling rivalry. Osiris is the god of the underworld, but he's also the god of fertility, resurrection, and vegetation. His brother Seth is the god of chaos, hostility, evil, and the desert, wars, and storms. Osiris represents rebirth and growth, while Seth represents destruction and puts Osiris in a trunk and then throws it into the Nile River. The trunk washes onto the shore and into a tree, basically. Isis, who's Osiris's wife, finds the trunk, but Seth steals the body and cuts it into small pieces, which are scattered throughout Egypt. And Isis, once again, comes to the rescue and finds all the pieces. She cries out so much that Ra, the god of the sun and the head of the Egyptian gods, has pity on Osiris and Isis. Isis mummifies Osiris, and he is brought back to life. He cannot live in the land of the living. However, he has to reside in the underworld where he is king. Osiris also serves and judges the souls of the dead. Now, we're going to come back to the West again and into the Americas, where twins were often viewed with fear because of their connection to the gods of creation. Twins are often found in creation myths of the Mesoamericans. There are two sets of twins involved in a Mayan the Popol Vuh, right? I have to say that right because to me it looks a little crazy. But Hun Hamfi and Vukup Hamfi are the older twins in the story, and Hun Hamfi had two sons named Hun Bats and Hun Kion, and he also had twins of Zwick named Zalago. I can't even say that word. It starts with an X. Balagu and Hanapu, right? There's so many different names, but these people start to, play games, and these games sometimes represent deaths, and they were tricked and killed by underworld demons. I mean, it gets wild. It gets wild. So this is one of the ones where they're sort of working in conjunction with each other, but it goes one of two ways. And most of the time, what happens is these two brothers are great for a while until it comes to a struggle, and in that struggle this vitriol spawns between them, and they fight. One usually kills the other, right? So this is the in what happens when we look at this as a whole, right? There's creation, the amazing moments of creation, and slowly mankind descends into chaos from which it was somewhat born, right? We talk about the darkness and how the darkness turns into the light, and that's how the light is created, no matter what ancient culture we talk about. And then the offspring of those creators often become at odds with each other, showing that there's different styles of humanity on the earth, roaming the earth at this time. And there's usually clash. There's a clash. This also gives credence to conquering of other tribes. These, primitive peoples are told these stories. These stories give them leverage to conquer the next tribe over, and so on and so forth. And it becomes empires and regimes, and it carries over into World War I and World War II. I mean, truly, this is a precedent where mankind is set on a path that seems more controlled or more negative in the sense of death and destruction until everything comes back to fruition to right now, where we're on this new precipice of setting a new trend, right? So we're seeing this happen. And we're in the mix of this. This is what the Great Awakening is, breaking down this old archetype, this old conquer or be conquered mentality, right? Into more of the communal, we're all one. Let's look past our differences and stop the fighting. Love reigns supreme, right? This is what we're, this is the narratives that we abide by now. But we see that these narratives that are of the old system right? Essentially, are breaking down. This is what we talk about, the breaking down of realities. And there's two budding realities right now breaking down next to each other. And a third reality is coming from underneath it, which is this spiritual movement, right? So there's a lot with the creation stories that there's similarities between all of them, that there's a common story in all of them, right? Lessons to be learned from all of it as well. This is kind of where we're going to pause tonight. And tomorrow night, we're going to have Joan of Angels on, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to really get into it. Don't mind me if I look tired. It's been a really crazy couple of days at work, with the holidays coming up, things like that. So, please like, share, subscribe. Dinner is just about ready here in my house, so I'm going to cut this one about 10 minutes short. Got to go eat dinner with the wife, my twin flame, my other half, the most amazing and beautiful person I've ever met in my entire life, as well as my mother. And she's staring at me with a smile. So my job was done. It was good on my part, good on me. Um, I could be a smooth talker at times when I'm talking to my wife, but no, I love you all, and everybody find those moments of joy throughout each day. The routine and the mundane can get to everybody all the time. Take a moment, stop, breathe, find something to enjoy throughout your day. It will, you know, it will change everything. It will change the way you see everything. So, with all of that being said, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment when this is finished. Help us beat these algorithmic bugs. As you can see, we've only had about 35 to 40 people. I mean, a few weeks ago, we had 90 to 100 people in here. I can tell that they're doing something to not let this get out. So we have to be the tidal wave that overcomes this garbage that they're putting us through with trying to reach more people. So, with all that being said, I love you all. Hope everybody has a great evening, and I'll see you all tomorrow night when we're here with Joan of Angels. Good night, everybody.